This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's May 11th, 2021. I'm Ross John Fortuna. For the past 14 months, federal employees have mostly been teleworking after an OMB memo called for maximum telework. Moving employees away from crowded offices and central locations made the pandemic work easier for most feds, defying the conventional wisdom that telework would harm productivity. Data from the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey showed feds felt that they were more satisfied and happier with their jobs during the COVID-19 crisis, while a Pentagon Inspector General survey showed defense civilians believed themselves to be more productive during the remote work period. National Treasury Employees Union President Tony Reardon spoke at a GovExec event in March and explained how telework has shattered that conventional wisdom and has affected all feds.
I'm going to let you in on what I think is probably one of the worst kept secrets on this issue. Managers and supervisors teleworked too. They like it. And based on at least, anecdotally, what I've heard from some of them is they don't want their agencies to get rid of telework either.
The question is now this. Will management take into account the efficacy of telework during any given labor negotiation? The acrimony of the previous administration is somewhat absent from the current White House, but places like the Social Security Administration still have massive issues with distrust and frustration between the two sides. Our guest today writes on our site that telework may factor into these negotiations, and that it may give an avenue for a more collaborative future. Robert M. Tobias is a distinguished practitioner in residence at the Key Executive Leadership Program at American University, the former president of the National Treasury Employees Union, and a GovExec contributor. His latest post on our site is headlined, "The Pandemic Has Created an Opening to Improve Federal Labor Management Relations." After a short break, we'll talk about his post and the way forward. We'll discuss labor management issues and how telework factors into those issues next on GovExec Daily, sponsored by Salesforce.
We live in an always-on world that creates demands for better experiences and interactions with government at all levels. For the public sector to best deliver on its mission, agencies and their employees need IT systems that provide analytical insights to drive decisions, improve work process effectiveness, and provide the best experience for their constituents. With Salesforce, you can rapidly transform the way you deliver government services through capabilities, solutions, and products that flex and scale to meet every need. Learn more about how Salesforce can help your agency adopt the capabilities you need to improve mission impact at salesforce.com/government.
During the maximum telework period of the COVID-19 crisis, criticism of federal remote work has largely been blunted by Pentagon and OPM evidence that productivity has been maintained during this period. The pandemic experience now offers a unique opportunity for change because some of the old assumptions about the efficacy of telework were blown up by the data. This, our guest today maintains, could be done through labor management relations. Robert M. Tobias is a distinguished practitioner in residence at the Key Executive Leadership Program at American University, the former head of the National Treasury Employees Union, and a GovExec contributor. His latest post on our site is headlined, "The Pandemic Has Created an Opening to Improve Federal Labor Management Relations." He joins the show now to discuss how the COVID-19 crisis can be used to facilitate better conversations between labor and management. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So during the pandemic, as I mentioned up top, we've seen positive results in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, in engagement and satisfaction scores, as well as increases in productivity as reported by a survey done by the Defense Department IG. Do you think the telework period has been a net positive for feds and their productivity?
Well, I don't know whether federal employees would declare 100% mandatory telework during the COVID crisis a net positive, but I do know that Congress first enacted legislation to allow telework in 1978. And at that time, some unions began to negotiate clauses in collective bargaining agreements, providing for telework, which was originally called Flexiplace. Then Congress in 1990 enacted some additional legislation that allowed agencies to pay for the equipment necessary for telework. But also, after 31 years in 2019, there were only 3% of employees doing telework in January of 2019. And by July, it was 59% doing telework. Now, the advantage to federal employees who were teleworking was it provided certainty. They had some control over when they worked in this whole sea of uncertainty associated with how they were going to feed themselves. How are they going to manage kids on Zoom calls? How are they going to manage the boredom? They knew that they could control when they work and fit around all of the other uncertainty in their lives. So we also know that those employees who telework 3 or more days a week reported a federal employee viewpoint score of 76 out of 100. And those who did not have telework reported a score of 62.5. Now that difference is significant in terms of both performance and engagement. So I don't know how you would define net positive, but it seems to me that those who were able to telework had more engagement and better performance than those who did not, which turned on its head the expectations of the managers in the federal government.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that has produced a counterpoint to this sort of conventional wisdom in a lot of places about telework, this idea that people would not be as effective at home. In your piece, you do lay out a worst case scenario for labor management relations, but there is kind of a better way as well. So how do you think labor management will find a better way or a more collaborative route?
So the worst case scenario would be for managers and union leaders to return to the pattern of telework bargaining prior to COVID. Managers sought to limit opportunities for telework, and they were successful. And union leaders sought to expand telework to the maximum extent possible, and they were unsuccessful. So that created a lot of winner-loser attitudes. So this competitive adversarial collective bargaining approach fostered over the past 4 years created this winner-loser environment, and it was determined by whose position prevailed. And so that approach ignores the positive COVID telework data that we were just discussing. So it is possible, I think it is possible, to create a different context for bargaining, a collaborative approach to bargaining. And I think this could happen if instead of jumping right back to the bargaining table to negotiate new terms and conditions of telework, that the parties would agree to maintain the status quo for a period of time while they really investigate why telework worked. Why did it work? Why did just a pivot of a month or two yield this sustained performance and better engagement than anyone ever expected? Why did that happen? What behavior changed from the perspective of managers? What behavior, if any, changed from the perspective of employees to make this possible? So I suggest they maintain the status quo and gather data about why this happened, because no one really knows. There are a lot of theories and a lot of, but no one really knows. I mean, someone knows why it worked in their workplace, but no one knows across the government why it worked. So gathering the data about why it worked, I think, should be an important first step, because then both parties have the same data and can seek to reinforce what works as opposed to going by theories and by past adversarial bargaining.
Yeah, it's just something that we've said a lot on this show that seems like it's applicable to all things, but certainly with regards to evidence-based data, definitionally you have to identify the problem and operate from the same set of facts before you go forward on anything. I mean, to those negotiations, do you think that telework will be a sticking point? Do you see management making any changes in the way they approach this stuff?
Well, I think it can be a sticking point. I mean, if I'm sticking to my old way of bargaining and I'm sticking to my old facts, we're going to get stuck in the bargaining process. But if we really do start asking the kinds of questions that I think need to be asked, what policies worked and what new policies do we need to put in place through collective bargaining that will sustain both employee engagement and sustain performance? How, work processes, I believe, were changed in this telework environment. What work processes need to be solidified? What new work processes need to be solidified as a result of this telework experience that represent a significant change from the past? Or what core hours are actually critical that must be maintained, and what flexibilities that existed in COVID continued? What actions and activities might we create to offset the loneliness that occurred from people working at home and alone and without working with their colleagues face to face? What childcare subsidies do we need to allow federal employees to work at home and be free from 9 to 2, sitting next to a kid who's doing Zooming in class? So these are all, data can be acquired to learn about all of these questions, but no one's doing it today.
I mean, to that end, this is sort of outside of what we were normally talking about, but do you think that will be something that outside of the survey data, do you think that's data that's going to be collected?
Well, I'm hoping that the parties will agree to collect that data. It's certainly not part of the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. I believe a new comprehensive agency by agency effort needs to be undertaken, because I believe agencies reacted differently. I don't think every agency and every manager reacted the same way. I teach at American University, and I remember we had a panel of SES folks who were speaking to students. And so I asked the question, so what behavior did you have to change in order to be successful? And one person said, I'm an introvert. I've always been an introvert, but I recognized pretty quickly I could not behave as an introvert as I had in the past and wait for people to come to my office and speak. I loved that. So I recognized that I had to make an effort to speak to everyone I led on a regular basis. It was painful, it was difficult, but I did it and it worked. Now that is a significant change in behavior that we need to capture.
Yeah, the operating within that knowledge base with data, I think is really a great way to get things sort of on the same page. Telework, sort of to sort of key on that a little bit, is seen as sort of great for rank and file people, and certainly we've talked about it in the context of labor management relations. But we had Tony Reardon on at an event for GovExec recently, and he said, "Look, management likes telework too." Do you think that changes the way anyone goes into negotiations? I mean, management's dealt with telework for the last year too. They probably see the benefits.
Well, they not only see the benefits, their performance amped up as well. They had to learn new leadership skills. And I believe that capturing what those leadership skills are. Now, my suspicion is, just like the person I spoke of before, they learned new ways of connecting and supporting the people they lead. Now that is huge in the workplace. Those federal employee viewpoint scores about engagement didn't happen by magic. They happened because people felt more engaged, which means that leaders changed their behavior. Now, as I say, I suspect, but I don't have any data to support my suspicion. And gathering that data, I think, would be illuminating for leaders who are making decisions about how to reorganize the work of managers and leaders, specifically from my point of view of downplaying the doing, which heretofore has been the predominant behavior of leaders, to leading, which is engaging with those they lead to support and help them do better.
We'll sort of end on this. You've led NTEU. The Biden administration, has been comparatively pro-labor in its time so far. And we've had guests who said that's just the regular pendulum of Republicans versus Democrats as far as holding the White House. But they've endorsed the PRO Act. There's an executive order endorsing workers' rights to organize. Does that give you hope for better labor management relations? Like, does the culture come down from the White House to disperse to the agencies?
Well, it does give me hope. It does give me hope. But it's also important to keep in mind that we are asking union leaders to reemerge from the competitive, adversarial labor management relations that they've been dealing with over the last 4 years. And we'd be asking Biden political leaders, most of whom have had very little contact with unions, and most of whom are focusing on creating new public policy consistent with the Biden promises, to step back from what they are doing, recognize their inexperience, and re-engage with public policy implementation to implement these new labor management relationships, and more particularly, a new way of doing telework. So we're asking for significant changed behavior. And I don't think it's enough for President Biden to just issue an executive order. This should be a management priority for those in political leader positions. And only he can make that happen. Now, Bill Clinton, when he issued an executive order calling for more collaborative labor management relations, followed up with constant reminders to management leaders about changing their behavior, and it was successful in large part. President Biden has to do the same.
Let's see if that happens. Hopefully that's a sign of things to come in a lot of ways, as far as better management and labor relations, and hopefully to start, at least comparatively, of a new era.
I'm hopeful.
Good. Thanks again. Thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me, Ross.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortune. We want to thank GovExec contributor Robert M. Tobias for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. Now stay tuned for a message from our sponsor, Salesforce.
Hello and welcome. I'm Juliette Van Wagenen, editor of branded content for Government Executive Media Group's Studio 2G, and I'm sitting down today with Chris Radich, Vice President of Digital Strategy at Salesforce. Chris is going to share his insights into the growing world of cloud services, why agencies need to plan modernization efforts effectively in order to ensure they can get the most out of their investments, and how Salesforce can play a role in creating robust transformation strategies. Chris, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Let's get right into it. Why is it more important than ever that agencies look at modernizing their legacy IT systems?
Well, you look back in time and there was always this digital dilemma within government. There's a variety of reasons. I studied it in my previous role, wrote a report on the state of federal IT, but it feels different this time. It feels like COVID-19 has really been the number one catalyst that we've ever seen in terms of IT modernization, or even more broadly, digital transformation. And it's an exciting time to be an IT leader, to be a mission leader, because it's allowed for that change to happen more naturally. The challenge across government has always been some of the approvals, some of the compliance, maybe even bureaucracy. And COVID has changed the game from my perspective.
As citizens and employees are both looking for more digital experiences, where should agencies be focusing their energies?
When you think of digital experience, it's such a broad priority. And it is morphed into this human-centered design or customer experience priority. But you really have to narrow the aperture to become effective in driving results here. And the way I would describe it is you need to focus specifically on customer service and engagement, not just CX and human-centered design. And this includes projects that can be implemented quickly, such as contact centers, single front door portals, and digital engagement channels.
Great. And so how can Salesforce specifically help agencies to enable wholesale enterprise digital transformation and include, tools and services like those that you mentioned?
Well, our whole company's principle at Salesforce has always been to focus 100% of our energy around the customer and to build our digital transformations around that government customer. So whether it's a veteran or a farmer or a state or local resident, the customer is always front and center. And when you do that, you start to really identify it's all about improving services, integrating with legacy systems effectively, and providing ways to make data-driven decisions at all levels. And we're leaders in all three categories in terms of customer engagement center, integration platform, and analytics and BI.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Chris, thank you for joining me, and thank you to everyone listening to our podcast. To learn more, be sure to check out the Salesforce Public Sector Transformation Summit on Tuesday, May 25th. You can register at publicsectorsummit.com/register.